Welcome, dear listeners. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to enjoy more original stories every week. The Inspector Price Mystery Series is a trademarked original, available exclusively on this channel. Settle in, the mystery awaits. The Constantinople Cipher. Chapter 1. The Death of Dr. Quentin Harrow. It was a grey and whispering morning in London, and in the scholarly heart of Bloomsbury, nestled between the British Museum and a quiet row of Georgian townhouses, a tragedy had just unfurled. Dr. Quentin Harrow was dead. His body lay slumped across the desk in his study, a mahogany chamber lined with oriental maps and dusty tomes. A faint curl of smoke still rose from the fireplace. The ink on the page before him had bled into a dark blot. Inspector Harold Price of Scotland Yard arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, his coat damp from the drizzle. A quiet but formidable presence, Price's signature moustache twitched slightly as he surveyed the scene. Sergeant Aldgate, already on site, stepped forward. "Dead less than an hour, sir," Aldgate said, lifting the corner of a silk curtain to let in more light. "Housekeeper found him at 7:15. No sign of forced entry." Price glanced at the body. Dr. Harrow's spectacles lay cracked on the floor. His hand clutched a small half-burned scrap of parchment covered in what appeared to be Arabic script. His right temple bore a bruise. "No weapon found?" Price asked, bending to examine the mark. "None, sir, and no one came or went according to the doorman." Price looked around the room. The air was still tinged with pipe smoke and the unmistakable scent of rosewater, a curious, almost foreign fragrance. On the desk was a sealed envelope, addressed in Harrow's hand. "To Inspector Harold Price, Scotland Yard." He opened it. "If this reaches your hands, dear Inspector, then I am already gone. What I uncovered in Constantinople is far greater than I ever imagined. Tell Jane Parsons she was right to be cautious. The cipher is real. The Sultan's seal is no mere myth. It's a warning. Look to the minarets. Look to the east." Quentin Harrow. Price frowned. Jane Parsons. The name rang a bell. An independent investigator, sharp-witted, unconventional, and, by all accounts, irritatingly perceptive. He hadn't seen her in over a year, not since their paths briefly crossed during the Trentmere Gallery theft. "Bring me his travel itinerary," Price said to Aldgate, "and summon Miss Parsons." "Yes, sir," the sergeant replied. 2 hours later, Regent's Crescent. Jane Parsons, impeccably dressed in a teal velvet coat, emerged from the fog like a heroine from a serialized novel. She had an umbrella in one hand and a black notebook in the other. Her eyes, quick and unyielding, met Price's as the door opened. "I suppose you'd like to discuss Dr. Harrow," she said, stepping past him into the parlour without waiting for an invitation. "You knew him well?" Price asked, gesturing for her to sit. "Well enough. He consulted me 3 weeks ago," Jane said, removing her gloves. "He believed someone had followed him back from Constantinople. Something to do with a relic he'd smuggled out." "Smuggled?" She nodded. "A fragment of parchment, possibly 15th century. Said it was once part of a cipher used by Ottoman royal scribes." Price leaned back. "He left me a letter. Mentioned a Sultan's seal." Jane raised an eyebrow. "Then it's worse than I thought. The seal isn't a relic, Inspector. It's a code, said to be the key to understanding a vast espionage network hidden beneath Ottoman bureaucracy." "That sounds more like folklore than fact." "So did Rasputin," she replied dryly, "until he wasn't." There was a silence between them, a familiar tension. They were not rivals, not exactly, but neither would admit to being comfortable in the other's company. Still, Price knew talent when he saw it, and Jane Parsons had it in spades. "What exactly did Dr. Harrow find?" Price asked. Jane opened her notebook and slid across a sketch. "He traced a path between several ancient mosques in Constantinople, said they aligned like points on a compass. At the centre of them, the Rustam Pasha mosque. Hidden beneath it, he believed, is a vault where the original cipher was kept." "And you believed him?" "I believed he was terrified. That usually counts for something." Price stood and crossed to the window. "Dr. Harrow's assistant is missing," he said at last. Gone sometime last night. Then the cipher may already be in dangerous hands, Jane said, standing. And if it's what Harrow feared, the Empire may have more than just foreign agents to worry about. Price turned toward her. How would you like a holiday in Constantinople? She smiled slightly. Only if you promise not to get in my way. I never promise the impossible. Later that evening, a watcher in the fog. Across the street from Harrow's townhouse, a tall man in a brown overcoat stood smoking a thin cigarette. His eyes followed every movement behind the lace curtains. He spoke into the collar of his coat in low, accented English. They are preparing to leave, both of them. Alert the gatekeeper in Galata. The price of secrets has just risen. He flicked the cigarette into the gutter and vanished into the mist. Chapter 2. The Cipher Trail. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time Inspector Price returned to Scotland Yard. The letter from Dr. Harrow burned in his pocket like a coal. He had read it thrice already, each time feeling as though it were written not by a dying man, but by someone cracking under the weight of a terrible discovery. Inside the Yard's records division, the clatter of typewriters echoed like gunfire. Price's boots clicked down the tiled corridor as he made his way to the archives. Within 20 minutes, he had Dr. Harrow's full file laid before him. Passport copies, university affiliations, overseas permits, even a telegram from the British consulate in Constantinople, dated 2 months ago. He read it aloud to himself, frowning. October 7th, 1907, received by Consul Atkinson, Galata branch. Dr. Quentin Harrow requests audience regarding sensitive Ottoman materials acquired during excavation in Eyüp district. Documents potentially tied to state secrets. Harrow claims risk to life if content made public. File referred to Foreign Office. Below it, stamped hastily in red ink, no action taken. Price exhaled slowly. Bureaucratic negligence or something more deliberate? He tucked the file into his coat and left the Yard for the evening. Mayfair, later that night. Jane Parsons' flat on Green Street was tucked above a florist's shop, whose sweet scent of lilacs clung to the staircase. Inside, her sitting room was warm, its dark wood shelves filled with case journals, Turkish and Persian folk tales, and more maps than could possibly be necessary for one lifetime. An open bottle of red sat on the side table. Jane stood at her writing desk, scribbling into her field notebook. Price stood by the window, arms crossed. There's more, Jane said, passing him a folded letter. This came 2 days ago, no return address. I assumed it was from Quentin, but now I'm not so sure. The paper was aged, possibly Turkish parchment. On it, in dark ink, were 6 lines of ciphered text, written in a mixture of Arabic calligraphy and numeric code. Across the bottom, a stamped insignia, crescent moon and star bisecting a tulip, with an English word faintly embossed beside it. Selamet. Peace, Price translated. Or safe conduct, depending on the context, Jane corrected, pouring herself a glass. It's an Ottoman diplomatic seal. Old, maybe pre-Tanzimat. Quentin said he found it etched into stone beneath the Eyüp cemetery near the Golden Horn. Price looked up. He went digging in Ottoman tombs? He believed the vault holding the cipher scroll was hidden beneath a madrasa that once served as a secret archive during the reign of Mahmud II. He also thought the cipher had been used to manipulate treaties between the Ottomans and the British in the 1830s. Espionage, Price muttered. The quiet war. Jane nodded. He feared someone still alive knew how to use it. Price's brow furrowed. Then they may have killed him for it. The next morning they boarded the London to Dover Express at Euston Station. Price had arranged diplomatic clearance through the Foreign Office. From Dover, they would cross to Calais, take the overnight train to Vienna, and finally journey to Constantinople via the Orient Express, a journey of 5 days under diplomatic escort. In their compartment, Jane set her satchel down with a sigh. 5 days in close quarters, Inspector. Let's hope you don't snore. I don't, Price said without humour. But I do ask questions, starting with this. Why are you so invested in this case? Jane turned to him, her expression guarded. Because Harrow's death feels like unfinished business. He was nervous when he returned. There were codes in the margins of his journal. Names, coordinates, a note written backward that read, "Not all agents wear uniforms." She sat and withdrew a rolled map from her satchel, spreading it on the table. "Look here," she pointed. "Rustam Pasha Mosque, Ayup Cemetery, Topkapi Palace. They form a triangle, and at the centre—" "A shadow mosque," Price finished. "No longer standing." "Exactly, but the vault beneath it might still exist." Price leaned closer. "Do you think the cipher is still hidden there? If it is, we're not the only ones looking for it." Meanwhile, Constantinople, Galata district. The Galata district was alive with colour and confusion. Greek, Armenian, Turkish, and Levantine merchants called out in a dozen tongues. Steamships whistled from the Bosphorus. Narrow alleys curved between tall, crumbling buildings. In a quiet back room of a tobacco shop, a man in a fez unrolled a weathered British map. A single name was circled in red ink: Inspector Harold Price. Another name, hastily added beneath it, in smaller script, Jane Parsons. "Send word to Halil Pasha," the man said in Turkish. "Tell him they are en route, the yardman and the woman detective. If they find the cipher, they must not leave the city alive." That night, aboard the Orient Express, the gentle lurch of the train through France was almost soothing. Jane sat by the window watching the countryside blur past under moonlight. "I never asked," she said suddenly. "Why did you take this case so personally?" Price hesitated, then replied without turning. "Because once, long ago, I believed in the nobility of secrets, that they were kept to protect people. But after the war in the Sudan, I learned—" He stopped, his jaw clenched. Jane's voice softened. "You lost someone?" Price gave a single nod. "Someone who trusted the wrong cipher." Outside, the wheels of the train rattled into the darkness. Somewhere ahead, beyond the Alps and across the Golden Horn, answers awaited. But so did enemies. Chapter 3. Beneath the Crescent Sky. The sun hung low and golden as the steamer curved into the Bosphorus, slicing between continents. Constantinople unfurled before them like a tapestry, its minarets piercing the sky, domes catching the last light of day, and 1,000 years of history layered in its stones. From the upper deck of the ferry, Inspector Price watched silently. Jane Parsons stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the skyline, where the silhouette of Hagia Sophia stood like a sentinel. A warm breeze carried the scent of cardamom and salt. "It's like stepping into a dream," Jane murmured. "Or a chessboard," Price replied. "And we've just entered someone else's game." The ship docked at Karaköy as the muezzin's call to prayer echoed across the water, weaving through the cries of gulls and the clamour of merchants. A man in a dark Western-style suit and a crimson sash awaited them at the pier, holding a sign with their names. He bowed politely. "Welcome to Constantinople, Inspector Price, Miss Parsons. I am Selim Bayraktar, aide to the British consulate. Your lodgings have been arranged at the Pera Palace Hotel. Your presence has already been noted." "Noted by whom?" Jane asked, as they followed him toward a waiting carriage. Selim hesitated. "There are many ears in this city, and not all of them are friendly." The Pera Pala, built for travellers of the Orient Express, stood with elegant pride overlooking the city's European quarter. Rich with Belle Époque decor, the hotel was a haven for diplomats, authors, and exiled aristocrats. Its corridors whispered secrets in every language. Their suite bore views of the Golden Horn and was discreetly guarded by a member of the consulate staff. "We'll need to move quickly," Price said, unpacking his case. "Whoever killed Harrow may already be here." Jane sat at the writing desk, examining her notes. Quentin believed the cipher scroll was sealed in a vault beneath the ruins of the Çifte Minareli Medrese, a dual minaret seminary destroyed in the fire of 1856. The Ottomans supposedly buried certain heretical documents beneath it. If the cipher was among them, it would explain why the location was hidden beneath layers of religious architecture and myth. "There's more," Jane added, retrieving a torn page from Harrow's journal. "He references something called the White Index, a ledger of names written in invisible ink. Names of those who possessed the cipher across generations. British names, Inspector. Price's jaw tightened. That ledger could ignite a diplomatic fire, and someone may already be trying to use it. They ventured into the heart of the city at dusk, escorted by Selim, who proved a discreet and knowledgeable guide. In the spice-scented maze of Galata Market, they searched for Yusuf the scholar, an elderly man Harrow had referenced in his letters. They found him in a shaded alcove of a bookstall near the old Genoese tower, sipping strong Turkish coffee and reading a scroll older than most kingdoms. "I knew Quentin," Yusuf said without looking up. "He was a fool with a good heart. He asked questions the wise do not ask." "Did he find the cipher?" Jane asked. Yusuf rolled the scroll and finally met their eyes. He found a piece of it, a riddle encoded on parchment made of calfskin, but the cipher was never complete. It was split centuries ago, half to the Ottomans, half to their allies. The Sultan feared betrayal. That fear was justified. He leaned closer. "Seek the tomb of Mehmed the Learned, but beware the fire-eyed man." "Who?" Price asked. Yusuf's eyes clouded. "You'll know him when you see him. He wears a British coat, but his soul belongs to no nation." Before they could question him further, a loud crack split the air. A shot. The scroll burst into flames in Yusuf's hands, and chaos erupted as the stall caught fire. Selim pulled Jane aside. "Run!" Price shielded Yusuf as a second bullet struck the wood post beside him. By the time the fire was subdued, the attacker had vanished, and Yusuf was gone. Back at the Pera Palace, Jane sat in the lamplight, scribbling the last of Yusuf's words into her notebook. "He said, fire-eyed. Do you think he meant that literally?" she asked. "Possibly," Price replied. "Or perhaps metaphorically. Zealotry has a look to it." A quiet knock interrupted them. A young porter stood at the door, eyes downcast. "A gentleman left this for you, sir." He handed over a folded note and disappeared. Price opened it. A single sentence in Turkish. "The seal is broken. The white index has awakened. Trust no one." Jane exhaled. "Harrow?" "No," Price said. "He was never cryptic. This is someone else. Someone who knows the game we've stepped into." "Then we're not the only players anymore." As they stood in silence, the distant call to prayer floated once more. Through the window, and beneath the crescent sky, a deadly puzzle was unfolding. Chapter 4. The Watcher at the Rustam Pasha Mosque. The morning sun bathed Constantinople in a golden fire, and in the streets below, the day unfolded with its usual rhythm. Vendors calling in Turkish and Greek, steam rising from coffee carts, ferries bustling along the Bosphorus. Yet to Inspector Price and Jane Parsons, the city pulsed with something deeper now, the tremor of pursuit. They had spent the night studying maps and cross-referencing Harrow's scribbled coordinates. One location recurred, the Rustam Pasha Mosque. Harrow had circled it 3 times in his journal and drawn a faint line between it and the long-vanished Çifte Minareli Medrese. The triangle was narrowing. "This mosque," Jane said over breakfast, "was built atop an older foundation. What if the vault lies beneath both structures? A shared underground archive?" "It would explain Harrow's obsession," Price replied, "and why someone's trying to erase every trace of it." They finished their coffee and set out at once, taking a winding route through side streets. Price wore a charcoal overcoat and carried his service pistol discreetly. Jane was dressed in a soft grey dress and feathered hat, but her gloved hands clutched a satchel heavy with documents, and a Derringer pistol tucked into the lining. Rustam Pasha Mosque. The Rustam Pasha Mosque stood quietly nestled between shops and spice stalls, its exterior modest compared to the grandeur of the Blue Mosque or Hagia Sophia. Jane removed her shoes at the entrance. "It's almost too peaceful," she whispered. "Which is why it's perfect," Price murmured. They moved through the mosque slowly, careful to respect the space as they observed the layout. Beneath the prayer chamber, accessible only through a rarely used maintenance stair, was a substructure, stonework far older than the mosque itself. A custodian, an elderly man, with milky eyes and a hooked cane, watched them from the shadows. Price approached him respectfully. "Affedersiniz efendim," he said in slow Turkish. "We seek a room below, foundation level. A friend once came here to study Ottoman masonry." The old man stared for a long moment before nodding. Without a word, he turned and began walking. They followed. The custodian led them down a narrow, dust-choked stairwell behind the ablution fountain. With each step, the air grew colder, denser with centuries of silence. Finally, they reached a stone door, reinforced with iron bolts and marked by a fading tulip motif. The custodian turned to them. "Only 30 minutes. After that, no longer safe." He opened the door and shuffled back into the stairwell, leaving them alone. Inside, the chamber smelled of limestone and old ink. Carved niches lined the walls, some filled with decaying scrolls, others empty. In the centre stood a marble pedestal, atop which lay a battered leather case. Jane approached it with reverence and opened it. Inside, a folded piece of vellum, aged but intact, inscribed with letters and numbers, not in Ottoman Turkish, but in ciphered Latin. "This isn't the cipher scroll," she whispered. "It's a key." Price examined it, or part of one. Harrow may have had the rest. Jane took out a small vial of lemon juice and gently brushed it across the margins. Invisible ink blossomed. "Coordinates," she said, voice tightening. "And initials, e.g., possibly Edward Greaves, the British attaché who disappeared here in 1898. "Vanished without a trace," Price said, recalling the report. "Believed to have defected. Or silenced." Suddenly the silence broke. A creak echoed behind them. They turned. A tall man stood in the doorway, half-shadowed, eyes cold and gleaming. He wore a Western trench coat over Ottoman-style trousers, and his eyes, an unnatural amber, glowed like fire in the gloom. "You are trespassing," he said in crisp English. Jane raised her pistol. "So are you." The man stepped forward. "You have something that belongs to the state." "Which state?" Price asked, drawing his revolver. The man smiled faintly. "Whichever one still thinks the game is worth playing." He hurled a small object to the ground, a flash grenade. Light exploded. Jane cried out. Price staggered back, shielding his eyes. By the time the smoke cleared, the man was gone, and so was the cipher key. They stumbled up the steps into the sunlight, dazed, blinking. The custodian was gone. The mosque had returned to its peaceful hum, but on the stone railing outside, someone had painted a symbol in red ink, the crescent moon split by a dagger. Jane paled. "That's the mark of al-Assad." "Who?" "A secret Ottoman network, supposedly disbanded after the Empire's intelligence wing was restructured. But Quentin believed they were still active and protecting the cipher with blood." Price looked around. The square was full of people, children chasing cats, merchants shouting, women drawing water. Yet he felt watched, not by one, by many. They returned to the Pera Palace in silence, but on the writing desk in their suite, a package awaited them. No note, no return address. Inside, a photograph, black and white, grainy, taken in 1898. It showed a younger Edward Greaves standing in front of the Rustam Pasha mosque. Beside him, a man with the same fire-coloured eyes they had seen just hours before. On the back of the photo, scrawled in fading pencil, "He never aged." Chapter 5. The Fireeyed Man. The photograph lay between them like a whisper from the past. Edward Greaves, dead these past 7 years, or so the Foreign Office claimed. And beside him in that blurred image, the same man they had encountered in the vault beneath Rustam Pasha Mosque, his fire-glinting eyes unmistakable. "This photo changes everything," Jane said softly. Price nodded, his brows drawn. "It means Harrow was right. Greaves never disappeared. He went underground, or was taken. Or converted," Jane murmured. "To what?" She didn't answer. Later that morning, the British consulate, Galata. The consulate was a pale stone building with iron balconies and shuttered windows, its interior quiet and cool like a monastery. Inspector Price presented his credentials and requested a private audience with Sir Thomas Halberd, acting deputy to the British ambassador in the region. Halberd was a tall, pinched man with a bureaucrat's stiffness and a diplomat's smile. He listened to Price's account of the events at the mosque, the scroll, the cipher, and the photograph. "This man you speak of," Halberd said, not blinking, "is a ghost story. A legend local children tell. They call him Atesh Goslu Adam, the fire-eyed man. Some say he worked for the sultans, others that he killed them. He appears, they say, whenever the Empire's secrets are threatened." Price narrowed his eyes. "You knew Greaves?" Halberd hesitated. "He was one of ours, yes. Intelligent, fluent in Arabic, Turkish, and Greek. Then he disappeared. We presumed he defected to the young Ottomans." "And the body?" "Never recovered." Jane stepped forward, voice sharp. "Why was his file sealed by Whitehall 2 months after his disappearance?" Halberd's expression soured. "Miss Parsons, you're asking questions that have long since passed their usefulness." "We found proof he's alive," Price snapped, "and he's involved in the murder of Quentin Harrow." Halberd's hands tightened around a pen. "Then I suggest you tread carefully, Inspector. You're not on English soil, and not all friends here wear red coats." They were shown out soon after. By the time they returned to the Pera Palace, the concierge handed Jane a telegram. She read it aloud. "Stop looking. You won't like what you find. A friend in London." "Cryptic," Jane muttered, crumpling it. Price sighed. "I know who sent it. Lord Cavendish." "The former director of military intelligence?" "Yes, and Harrow's former patron." Jane looked up sharply. "Do you think he's involved?" "I think he's trying to protect something, either us or himself." Before they could speak further, Selim Bayraktar appeared at their door, pale and out of breath. "Quickly, there's someone downstairs who wishes to speak to you. A man, not registered here, but he left this." He handed them a business card. The name was printed in fine gold lettering, Halil Niazi Pasha, Archivist Emeritus, Sublime Porter. Jane's eyes widened. The Ottoman archivist. He was said to have overseen the transfer of the Empire's secret records to Topkapi Palace in the 1870s. Price stood. "Let's go." They met Halil Pasha in a quiet tea house near the city walls, where the old aqueducts ran like stone veins. He was a man of contradictions, fragile but burning with clarity. His beard was white, his robes immaculate. "You've come far," he said, motioning for them to sit, "but not far enough." "You know about the cipher," Jane said. "I helped hide it," he replied. "Her with Greaves. The third," he hesitated, "was entrusted to the one man who was loyal to no country." "The fire-eyed man," Price murmured. Halil nodded. "His name was Alim Karaz, born in Egypt, educated in Cambridge. He served both thrones, and then neither. When he realised the cipher could destroy men without trial, he disappeared." "And now he's back," Jane whispered. Halil set a worn scroll on the table. "This is my piece, the last remnant of what I protected. You must take it and leave this city." "Why now?" Price asked. Halil looked at him, sorrow in his eyes. "Because the game has changed. The Empire is dying, and in its death throes, it will burn all that threatens it." Just then, a waiter approached and dropped a tray. A red dot danced on Halil's robe, a sniper's dot. Crack! The shot shattered the teacup in front of Halil. He slumped forward, eyes wide. Chaos erupted. Jane ducked beneath the table, pulling Price down with her. Patrons screamed and scattered as another shot tore through the wood. Selim burst through the rear door. "Come now, through the kitchen." They ran. That evening, shaken and silent, Jane and Price sat aboard a ferry, gliding across the Bosphorus toward the Asian side of the city. The scroll Halil had given them was hidden in Jane's coat. "I never imagined how deep this would go," she said softly. Price didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the shoreline behind them. A tall figure stood near the dock, the fire-eyed man, watching, waiting. Chapter 6. The Tomb of Mehmed the Learned. The ferry sliced through the dark waters of the Bosphorus, its lanterns flickering in the salty wind. The lights of Constantinople shimmered on the European shore, growing smaller As the vessel drew closer to the quieter, older Asian side, Üsküdar. Here, the city whispered, instead of roared. Inspector Price stood near the bow, gripping the railing, scanning the mist-veiled port. Jane Parsons stood behind him, hands buried in her coat, fingers wrapped tightly around Halil Pasha's scroll, hidden within her lining. Finally, Price broke the silence. Why Mehmed the Learned? Because he was the architect of the cipher system, Jane replied. Halil's scroll mentioned a tomb carved beneath the hills of Üsküdar. An old dervish lodge was said to rest above it, forgotten after the Tanzimat reforms. And now? Price asked. Now, Jane said, her voice low. It's a ruin, swallowed by time. But if we find it, we might find the final clue, or the full cipher. And perhaps, Price added, who's willing to kill for it? With the help of Selim, who had quietly followed them aboard, the trio disembarked and trekked through narrow winding streets, far from the docks and the opulence of embassies and palaces. They reached a wooded rise, and hidden within the thicket, crumbling stone walls, overgrown by vines, and the remnants of what had once been an Ottoman tekke, a dervish lodge. The building was half swallowed by ivy and thyme. Above the entrance, faded Arabic calligraphy bore the words, "Knowledge is the torch that lights the soul." Jane's lantern flickered as they entered the ruin. Beneath the shattered dome, the floor was littered with dust, rubble, and cracked mosaics. "Spread out," Price instructed, drawing his revolver. "We're not alone." Selim stayed near the door, watchful. Jane found it first, a square panel in the floor, misaligned, etched with an 8-pointed star. She pressed the centre. A section of stone lifted slightly. They pried it open. Beneath, a stone staircase descending into darkness. The air below was cool, still, and smelled of centuries. They descended slowly, lanterns in hand, into a tunnel of stone arches. The walls were lined with alcoves, some filled with bones, others with scrolls, and broken inkwells. Symbols were etched into the pillars, both Islamic and pre-Ottoman glyphs, older still. Jane's breath caught. This isn't just a tomb, it's an archive. In the heart of the chamber stood a sarcophagus, black marble, unmarked. Before it, a lectern carved from cedar. Resting atop it, a scroll wrapped in a crimson ribbon, sealed with wax and stamped with the tulip and crescent, the Sultan's seal. Jane reached for it. "Wait," Price said, but it was too late. Thunk! Arrows shot from hidden slits in the wall, narrowly missing Jane's shoulder. "Trap mechanisms," she said breathlessly, stepping back. Price examined the floor. "Pressure triggers. Center tile is safe. The outer ring—" "Got it." Jane stepped lightly, retrieved the scroll, and returned with it in her gloved hands. The seal was intact. She set it down carefully. "This is it," she whispered. "The full cipher." "Let's hope it was worth the bodies it left behind," Price said darkly. As they ascended back into the lodge, the sound of gunmetal clicked sharply in the dark. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Selim, his pistol raised. "Hand it over," he said quietly. "Now." Jane froze. "Selim?" "You've no idea what you're holding," he replied. "This cipher, if it's revealed, half of Europe will fall into chaos. Names of agents, false treaties, royal betrayals. Do you think your parliament will survive it, or the Sultan's court?" Price raised his weapon. "You're with them." "No," Selim said. "I'm with no one. Not anymore. I was part of al-Assad. I was trained to protect the cipher at all costs." "You led us here to die," Jane whispered. "I led you here," Selim said, eyes glinting, "so I could retrieve it without suspicion." Suddenly a shot rang out. Selim dropped his gun, stumbling back. Blood soaked through his tunic. From behind, a second figure emerged, the fire-eyed man. He said nothing. He simply raised his pistol and pointed it at Jane. Price fired. The shot grazed the man's shoulder. He flinched but didn't fall. "Run!" Price barked. Jane clutched the scroll and darted through the ruined walls, Price close behind. Another bullet ricocheted off the stone. The fire-eyed man didn't pursue. He simply watched, expressionless, as they vanished into the trees. That night, hidden in a safe house arranged by a sympathetic British attaché, Jane sat by lamplight, unrolling the scroll. Her hands trembled. "It's real," she whispered. "Encrypted Latin, names, treaties." Price looked over her shoulder. One name jumped out at him, bold, unmistakable, Cavendish. "God help us," he murmured. "A list of spies and a list of traitors, some long dead, some very much alive." And they had just pulled back the veil. Chapter 7. The Cipher Revealed. The sky over Constantinople was bruised with dawn as Price and Jane stood on the deck of a hired skiff, crossing the Bosphorus for what they both sensed would be the final time. Jane clutched the now combined cipher scrolls, rolled tightly and wrapped in waxed canvas. Selim's blood still stained the hem of her coat. "He died trying to protect us," she said quietly. "No," Price replied. "He died trying to atone." They were headed to Chamlika Hill, the highest point in Constantinople. According to the blind archivist's coordinates and the inscriptions hidden within Halil Pasha's scroll, it was there, beneath the crumbled remains of a dervish observatory, that Mehmed the Learned had been buried. But it was more than a tomb, it was a vault for the truth. They found the observatory ruins after an hour's climb, guided only by Jane's compass and a local map from 1892. Time had not been kind to the structure. Just a cracked foundation, ringed with shattered pillars. Price cleared the earth away from a sunken slab, revealing an iron hatch covered in symbols, crescent moons, tulips, lions, and beneath them all, the English coat of arms. "British and Ottoman," he murmured, "buried together." Jane traced a hand over the etched words in both languages. To hide the lie, one must bury the truth. They opened the hatch. It was the vault of Mehmed. A narrow tunnel descended into the earth, cut through stone and silence. They lit lanterns and moved slowly. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a vaulted crypt, perfectly preserved. Mosaic floors shimmered with blue and gold. Niches lined the walls, each holding a sealed jar, a scroll, or a ledger. At the centre stood a raised marble platform bearing a single chest, gilded and locked, flanked by two statues, one of Mehmed, the other of a faceless man. Price turned to Jane. "You have the key?" She nodded, withdrawing the ornate bronze key hidden in Selim's coat. She unlocked the chest. Inside, resting on velvet, was the white index. Not a scroll, but a codex, bound in white calfskin, its pages brittle with age. Inside, names, thousands of them. British, Ottoman, French, Russian, diplomats, generals, spies, merchants. Every covert hand that had ever shaped the silent war between empires was recorded here, each with dates, locations, and coded annotations. Near the front, E. Greaves, Kashgar 1895, Switzerland 1897, Constantinople 1898. Further down, Lord Henry Cavendish, Brussels 1892, Marrakech 1894, London 1903. Jane exhaled. "This would bring down half of Whitehall." "And possibly Parliament," Price added. "It's not a cipher, it's a weapon." "A ledger of sins." The sound of boots echoed from the tunnel above. Jane snapped the book shut. A voice called down, "You found it. Good." Alim Karaz emerged from the shadows, his face unchanged, ageless. Behind him stood two men in British trench coats, armed. "Leave the codex," Karaz said calmly. "It's not for your kind to carry." "Not for the British?" Jane asked. "Or not for those who still believe in truth?" Karaz gave a small sad smile. "Truth is for the dying, and I've seen too many truths." Price stepped in front of Jane, gun drawn. "You murdered Harrow. You tried to kill us. Why protect this?" "Because the lie," Karaz said, eyes gleaming, "is safer. You think the countries in Europe would survive if the public knew how many of their leaders sold secrets to the Ottoman court? How many sent innocents to die to protect oil routes or imperial borders?" He stepped closer. "I don't serve the Europe or the Sultan. I serve balance, and balance must be preserved." Jane raised her pistol. "You're a relic, the Empire's shadow. Then let me die as one." Karaz moved fast, but not faster than Jane's shot. He fell back, stunned, the bullet lodged in his side. The guards hesitated. Price acted. He fired once, then again. One man dropped. The second fled. Karaz sat against the stone, bleeding. "Take it then," he rasped. But once you read it, he did not finish his sentence. His eyes, dimming now, still held fire, then closed. Back in the Pera Palace, Jane sat at the desk, the white index open before her. Price stood at the window, watching the sun rise across the Bosphorus. "They'll come for it," she said. "For us." "Yes. We could bury it again, say we never found it." "We could," Price agreed, "but we won't." She looked at him. "You mean to hand it over?" "To the right people, carefully, with redactions, exposed just enough. Not to destroy, but to cleanse." Jane smiled faintly. "Ever the moderate. Ever the realist?" He looked at her, voice lower now. "We've changed history, Jane. Or maybe we've only uncovered it." She closed the book. "Then let history judge us." Epilogue. 2 weeks later, London. In a high-ceilinged chamber within the Foreign Office, an unmarked parcel was opened under lock and key. Inside, the white index, and a note unsigned. "Truth, like empire, may crumble, but from its ruins let something better rise."